The moment they walked out the door, the woman they said couldn't move reached for my hand. I didn't scream. I didn't pull away. I just stood there, frozen in the middle of a house that suddenly didn't feel like it belonged to the living anymore. Just minutes earlier, I had watched my daughter-in-law, Sophia, carefully adjust the blanket over her mother's still body, her voice soft but distant as she gave me instructions I hadn't asked for. "She won't wake up," she had said, almost too quickly. "Just make sure she's comfortable. We'll be back before dinner." My son Daniel stood behind her, avoiding my eyes, nodding like a man who had already decided not to ask questions. I told myself it was grief or stress, or just the way life changes people when they think they've moved beyond you. After all, I was 68, a widow, and lately, it seemed like my role in the family had quietly shifted from mother to obligation. So I said yes. I always said yes. The house was quiet after they left. Too quiet. The kind of silence that settles into your bones and makes every small sound feel louder than it should. I stood in the hallway for a moment, listening to the echo of the front door closing, the distant hum of a refrigerator, the faint ticking of a clock I hadn't noticed before. Then I walked back into the bedroom where Eleanor Hayes lay motionless beneath a pale blue quilt, her silver hair neatly brushed, her face calm in a way that didn't quite feel natural. I had only met her a handful of times over the years. She had always been polite, reserved, the kind of woman who spoke carefully, as if every word had to be measured before it was allowed to exist. Seeing her like this, silent, unmoving, should have felt like nothing more than a sad reality. But something about it unsettled me. Maybe it was the way Sophia had hovered too long before leaving. Maybe it was Daniel's silence. Or maybe it was just instinct, the kind you develop after a lifetime of watching people say one thing while meaning another. I stepped closer to the bed, my hands clasped loosely in front of me, unsure of what I was supposed to do. "Eleanor," I said softly, more out of habit than expectation. "It's Margaret. I'm here with you." The words barely left my lips before it happened. Her fingers twitched. Not a reflex. Not the kind of random movement you read about in medical brochures meant to comfort families. This was deliberate. Slow. Controlled. Her hand shifted against the blanket, then lifted just enough to reach toward me. I felt my breath catch in my throat as her fingers brushed against mine, cold but unmistakably alive. My first instinct was to call Daniel. My second was to run. But I did neither. Because in that moment, as her eyes fluttered open just enough to find mine, I realized something far more unsettling than fear. I realized that whatever story I had been told wasn't the truth. I did not pull my hand away, even though every instinct told me I should. Her grip was weak, but it was intentional, and that was enough to quiet the panic rising in my chest. I leaned in slightly, lowering myself into the chair beside the bed, careful not to make any sudden movements, as if the moment itself might disappear if I moved too fast. Eleanor's eyes were only partially open, unfocused at first, then slowly, painfully, they seemed to find me again. There was awareness there. Not confusion, not the blank emptiness I had expected from someone who had been described as completely unresponsive. Awareness. "You can hear me, can't you?" I whispered, my voice steadier than I felt. For a second nothing happened. Then her fingers tightened just a fraction more around mine. It was not strong, not urgent, but it was enough to answer the question I had not dared to fully ask. A chill ran through me, settling deep in my spine. I glanced toward the door, half expecting it to open, half expecting Sophia to walk back in and catch me witnessing something I was never supposed to see. But the house remained still. Quiet. Too quiet. "Eleanor," I said again, softer this time, leaning closer so my words would not carry beyond the room. "They told me you could not wake up." Her lips parted slightly, dry and trembling, and for a moment I thought she might not be able to respond at all. Then, barely audible, no more than a breath shaped into sound, she spoke. "Do not trust." The words were broken, fragile, but unmistakable. I felt my heart pound harder, each beat louder in my ears than the last. "Do not trust who?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer forming in the back of my mind. Her gaze shifted just slightly toward the hallway, toward the direction where the front door had closed minutes earlier. She did not need to say the name. I understood. I sat back slowly, my mind racing through every interaction I had ever had with Sophia, every polite smile, every carefully measured word. I had always thought she was distant, controlled, but I had never thought of her as someone capable of deception on this level. And yet, here I was, sitting beside a woman who had just proven that everything I had been told was not entirely true. I looked at the nightstand beside the bed, noticing things I had not paid attention to before. A glass of water untouched. A small plastic cup with pills neatly arranged. A schedule written in precise handwriting, listing times and dosages. It all looked organized, responsible, even caring. But now, instead of comfort, it raised questions. Why so precise? Why so controlled? I picked up the paper, scanning it quickly, my eyes catching on details that did not quite make sense. The timing seemed excessive. The notes too specific. Felt less like care and more like management. Like someone was maintaining a condition, not trying to change it. I set the paper back down carefully, exactly where I had found it, making sure nothing looked disturbed. Then I turned back to Eleanor, who was watching me now with a quiet intensity that sent another wave of unease through me. "I am here," I said quietly, squeezing her hand just enough for her to feel it. "And I am not going to ignore what I just saw." For the first time since I had walked into that house, I stopped feeling like a guest. I started feeling like a witness. I stayed in that chair longer than I intended, watching her, listening to the silence between each shallow breath, trying to understand how something like this could exist in plain sight without anyone questioning it. The afternoon light shifted slowly across the floor, stretching shadows along the walls, and with each passing minute, the house felt less like a home and more like a carefully arranged stage. Eleanor's eyes closed again at intervals, but not in the way I would expect from someone unconscious. It was controlled, almost deliberate, as if she were conserving energy, waiting. I leaned closer once more, lowering my voice even further. "How long?" I asked quietly. Her lips moved again, slower this time, each word taking effort. "Months," she breathed, barely audible, but enough to land with weight. "Months." I felt something tighten in my chest, not fear this time, but something sharper, something closer to clarity. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not a medical anomaly. This had been happening for a long time. I sat back and let that settle, my eyes drifting once again to the nightstand, to the neatly arranged pills and the schedule that now felt less like care and more like control. I picked up the small plastic cup again, this time studying the shapes and colors more carefully. I did not recognize them, but I knew enough to understand that medications, when used correctly, stabilize. When used differently, they can suppress. I set the cup down slowly, making sure everything remained exactly as it had been. I was not ready to confront anyone. Not yet. I needed to understand the full picture before I made a single move. My gaze shifted around the room, taking in details I had ignored earlier. The curtains were drawn just enough to limit direct sunlight. The door hinges were silent, recently oiled. Even the placement of the chair I was sitting in felt intentional, angled in a way that gave a clear view of the bed but not of the hallway. It was subtle, but it was there. Design. Control. I stood up quietly and walked to the doorway, pausing just before stepping out. The hallway stretched empty in both directions, the quiet pressing in again. I stepped out and moved slowly through the house, careful with each step, listening as much as looking. The kitchen was spotless, almost untouched, as if no one had truly lived in it for days. A stack of unopened mail sat neatly on the counter, addressed to Eleanor. Picked up the top envelope, glancing at the return address. A medical office. Another beneath it. And another. All recent. All unopened. That did not make sense. If Sophia was managing her mother's care, why leave important mail untouched? I set them back exactly where they had been, aligning the edges carefully, making sure nothing looked disturbed. As I turned to leave the kitchen, I noticed something else. A small black device tucked discreetly near the corner of the ceiling. Not obvious, but not hidden well enough either. A camera. My steps slowed as I backed away, my expression unchanged, my movements calm. I had lived long enough to know when to react and when to observe. This was not the moment to react. This was the moment to understand. I returned to the bedroom, closing the door gently behind me, my mind no longer searching for explanations, but building connections. Eleanor's eyes opened again as I approached, watching me with that same quiet awareness. I sat back down beside her, my voice steady, controlled. "They are watching," I said softly, just loud enough for her to hear. Her gaze did not shift, but something in it hardened, as if my words confirmed what she already knew. I reached for her hand again, this time with purpose, not hesitation. "Then we are going to give them exactly what they expect," I continued, my tone calm, almost detached. "Until we are ready to show them what they never planned for." I adjusted the blanket slightly, careful to keep my movements slow and natural, the way someone would behave if they believed everything in this house was exactly as it appeared. My hand lingered just long enough for Eleanor to feel the signal. Then I stepped back, letting my posture soften into something passive, something expected. If there were eyes watching from behind that small black lens in the corner of the ceiling, I wanted them to see nothing unusual. Just an older woman doing what she had always done. Helping. Complying. I moved to the window and pulled the curtain a fraction more closed, not enough to draw attention, just enough to dim the room. The light shifted, softer now, casting Eleanor's face in a gentler shadow. She closed her eyes. Again, perfectly still, her breathing slow and even, as if the moment from earlier had never happened. It was convincing. Too convincing. I stepped into the hallway again, this time without hesitation, my pace measured, my expression calm. I passed through the living room, letting my eyes briefly scan the space without turning my head too much. Everything remained in place. Too neat. Too controlled. I picked up a magazine from the coffee table, flipping through a few pages, giving myself a reason to stand there, to exist naturally within the space. My reflection caught in the dark screen of the television, and for a second I barely recognized the woman looking back. She did not look confused. She did not look afraid. She looked focused. I set the magazine down and walked into the kitchen again, this time opening the refrigerator slowly. Inside, everything was arranged with the same precision I had noticed before. Containers labeled, dates written in careful handwriting, portions measured. It looked like care. Felt like calculation. I closed the door gently and leaned against the counter, my mind moving through possibilities, discarding anything that felt too simple. This was not neglect. This was not forgetfulness. This was intention. I returned to the bedroom after a few minutes, making sure to keep my steps even, my breathing steady. Eleanor remained still, her eyes closed, her face peaceful in a way that now felt almost practiced. I sat down beside her again, folding my hands in my lap, waiting. Seconds passed. Then minutes. I did not speak. I did not move. I simply existed within the quiet, letting the rhythm of the house settle around me. After a while, her fingers shifted again, just slightly, brushing against the fabric of the blanket. A signal. I leaned in, my voice barely above a whisper. "We are not alone," I said, keeping my tone neutral, as if I were simply thinking out loud. Her eyelids flickered, but she did not open them. She understood. I let a few more seconds pass before continuing, still careful, still measured. "So we give them exactly what they expect." My hand moved to adjust the edge of the blanket again. A simple gesture, something anyone might do without thinking. "You rest," I murmured, just loud enough to be heard if someone were listening closely. "I will take care of everything." The words sounded ordinary, harmless, but underneath them something else had already begun to take shape. Not panic. Not anger. Something quieter. Something patient. I leaned back in the chair, my gaze drifting toward the ceiling for just a moment. Not long enough to be obvious, just long enough to acknowledge what was there. Then I looked away, letting my expression settle into calm acceptance. They believed they understood this situation. They believed they controlled it. And for now, I was going to let them keep believing that. I waited until the rhythm of the house felt predictable before I made my next move. Not rushing, not hesitating, just letting time pass in a way that would not raise suspicion. Eleanor remained still, her breathing steady, her presence almost fading back into the role they had assigned to her, and I understood that this required patience more than anything else. I stood up slowly and walked to the dresser, opening the top drawer with the kind of casual curiosity that would seem harmless to anyone watching. Inside, everything was arranged with the same careful precision I had already noticed throughout the house. Folded linens neatly stacked. A small box tucked in the corner. I did not reach for it immediately. I let my hand hover for a moment, then moved past it, closing the drawer again as if nothing had caught my attention. Control was not just about what you did. It was about what you chose not to do. I moved back into the hallway, pausing just long enough to listen. Still nothing. No sound from outside, no indication that anyone had returned. I made my way toward the small desk near the living room window, the one I had passed earlier without much thought. This time I stopped. There was a laptop sitting there, closed, a thin layer of dust suggesting it had not been used recently, or perhaps not used openly. Beside it, a notebook. I picked it up slowly, flipping through a few pages, careful not to bend the spine or leave any sign that it had been disturbed. The handwriting was not Sophia's. It was older, less controlled, more personal. Eleanor's. The entries were short, inconsistent, as if written whenever she had the chance. Dates scattered across the pages. Notes that did not fully explain themselves, but hinted at something beneath the surface. Words like dizzy, too much, cannot stay awake, repeated more than once. And then a line that made my hand pause. She changed it again. No explanation. No detail. Just that sentence sitting quietly among the others, but heavier than anything else on the page. I closed the notebook gently and set it back exactly where I had found it, aligning it with the edge of the desk. My reflection caught in the window glass again, and this time I recognized the look in my own eyes. It was not confusion anymore. It was understanding, still forming, but solid enough to guide what came next. I returned to the bedroom, my steps measured, my breathing even. Eleanor's eyes opened slightly as I approached, not fully, just enough to acknowledge me. I sat down beside her again, leaning in just enough to speak without being overheard. I saw your notes, I said quietly, keeping my tone neutral, almost conversational. Her fingers shifted faintly against the blanket. A response, a confirmation. The medication, I continued, choosing each word carefully. It is not what they say it is. Her eyes closed again, but this time the movement felt heavier, as if acknowledging something she had already accepted long ago. I rested my hand lightly over hers, not gripping, just enough to create contact. Then we do not change anything, I said softly. Not yet. I leaned back in the chair, letting the silence settle once more. But this time it felt different. Not empty. Not uncertain. It felt like the beginning of something deliberate. Something controlled. Outside, a car passed slowly down the street, its sound fading into the distance, and I realized that for the first time since I had arrived, I was no longer reacting to what was happening. I was preparing for what would come next. The rest of the afternoon passed in quiet repetition, the kind that would look ordinary to anyone observing from a distance but felt carefully measured with every second that went by. I made small movements, adjusted the blanket once more, poured a glass of water I did not drink, and sat long enough to let time soften the edges of suspicion. Eleanor remained still when she needed to, her breathing shallow and even, her presence fading back into the version of her they believed existed. It was a performance but not a desperate one. It was controlled, practiced, patient. I found myself matching that rhythm without thinking, moving through the house with the same restraint, the same quiet awareness of being watched. At one point I returned to the kitchen and picked up the small plastic pill container again, this time holding it a second longer than before, letting my eyes linger on the labels without appearing too focused. The names were unfamiliar, but the pattern was not. Timing that kept a body subdued, consistent enough to maintain a condition without drawing attention. I set it back down exactly as it had been and reached for a dish towel, wiping an already clean counter just to give my hands something to do. Outside, the sky had begun to shift toward late afternoon, the light warmer now, stretching longer shadows across the floor. Time was moving forward, and with it, whatever plan Sophia believed she had under control. I returned to the bedroom just as Eleanor's fingers moved again, subtle but deliberate. I closed the door gently behind me, not all the way, just enough to appear casual, then sat down beside her. They will come back soon, I said quietly, my voice steady, neutral, as if I were simply stating a fact with no weight behind it. Her eyes opened slightly, not fully, just enough to meet mine for a brief moment. There was no panic in them, no urgency, just understanding. I leaned closer, lowering my voice further. We need to know more before we do anything, I continued. What she is giving you. When? How often? Her lips parted slightly, the effort visible but controlled. 3 times, she whispered faintly. Morning, afternoon, night. I nodded slowly, committing it to memory, not reacting beyond what was necessary. And you have been pretending all this time, I added. Softly. Her eyes closed again, but her fingers pressed lightly against mine. A confirmation stronger than words. I sat back, letting the silence return. But this time it felt like a space we were both holding together. Not empty but shared. My gaze drifted once more toward the ceiling, not directly, just enough to remind myself that this moment was not entirely private. Then I looked back at her, my expression calm, almost detached. Then nothing changes, I said quietly. Not yet. I reached for the edge of the blanket again, smoothing it out in a slow, natural motion, the kind anyone might make without thinking. You stay exactly as they expect, I continued. And I will do the same. Outside, I heard the faint sound of a car turning onto the street, tires rolling slowly over pavement, then coming to a stop somewhere nearby. I did not move. I did not react. I simply adjusted my posture in the chair and folded my hands in my lap, letting my face settle into quiet patience. Because if there was one thing I understood now, it was this. The truth was already here. I just needed to let them believe it was still hidden. I heard the front door open before I saw them, the sound of keys brushing against the wood, the soft echo of footsteps entering a space that had remained too quiet for too long. I did not turn immediately. I let the moment settle, my hands resting calmly in my lap, my posture unchanged, as if I had been sitting there the entire time without a single thought out of place. Eleanor lay still beside me, her breathing slow, her expression empty in the way they expected. Perfect. The footsteps grew closer, measured, familiar. Sophia entered first, her presence filling the doorway with that same controlled energy she always carried, her eyes moving quickly across the room, scanning, assessing. Daniel followed behind her, quieter, his gaze lingering for a moment before dropping away. Everything all right? Sophia asked, her tone light but too precise, too careful. I turned my head slowly, offering a small, polite smile. Of course, I said, my voice steady, unhurried. She has not moved at all. I gestured lightly toward the bed, my hand relaxed, my expression neutral. Sophia stepped closer, her attention shifting immediately to her mother, her movements efficient, almost practiced. She adjusted the blanket, checked the position of Eleanor's arm, her fingers briefly brushing against her wrist as if confirming something only she understood. I watched without watching, my gaze soft, my presence passive. Daniel remained near the door, his hands in his pockets, his silence louder than anything he could have said. Did she eat? Sophia asked, not looking at me. No, I replied gently. She seemed exactly the same the entire time. That was not entirely untrue. It was simply not the whole truth. Sophia nodded slightly as if satisfied, then moved toward the nightstand. She picked up the small plastic cup, glancing at it briefly before setting it down again. I will take care of her evening medication, she said, her voice calm, almost reassuring. I inclined my head just enough to acknowledge her words, my expression unchanged. You always do, I replied softly. Sounded like appreciation. It was not. I stood up slowly, giving her space, my movements unremarkable, expected. I will make some tea, I added, stepping toward the door without waiting for a response. In the hallway, I paused just long enough to let my breathing settle again, then continued into the kitchen. I moved naturally, filling the kettle, placing it on the stove, letting the small routines create a sense of normalcy that could be observed, if anyone was watching. Behind me, I could hear faint movement from the bedroom, drawers opening, the soft clink of glass, the quiet rhythm of someone following a routine they believed was unquestioned. I reached into my purse, my fingers brushing against my phone, not pulling it out yet, just acknowledging it was there. Timing mattered. Everything mattered now. The kettle began to hum softly, the sound building as the water heated, and I found myself staring at the reflection in the kitchen window again. The woman looking back at me was no longer uncertain. She was patient, deliberate, waiting. I turned off the stove just before the water reached a full boil, pouring it slowly into a cup, the steam rising in thin, quiet lines. I carried the cup back toward the hallway, my steps steady, my expression calm. As I approached the bedroom again, I heard Sophia's voice, low but clear enough to catch a fragment. "Just a little longer," she murmured. I paused for half a second, not enough to be noticed, but enough to let the words settle into place. Then I stepped forward, pushing the door open gently, my face composed, my presence exactly what they expected it to be. And nothing more. I stepped fully into the room, the cup of tea steady in my hand, my expression soft and unchanged, as if I had heard nothing at all. Sophia glanced up briefly, her face smoothing into a polite smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "That was quick," she said lightly, as if timing me had always been part of her routine. I returned the same calm tone, setting the cup down on the nightstand without disturbing anything else. "I did not want it to get cold," I replied, my voice even, my movements slow and deliberate. Eleanor remained still, her breathing unchanged, her presence exactly what they expected to see. Perfect. Sophia reached for the medication again, this time more directly, her fingers moving with practiced ease as she prepared the next dose. I watched from the corner of my eye, not staring, not interfering, just existing in the same space. "You have a system," I said gently, as if making casual conversation. She nodded slightly. "It is important to stay consistent," she answered, her tone controlled, almost rehearsed. "That is what the doctors recommended." I inclined my head, accepting the explanation without question, even though the words no longer held any weight for me. Daniel shifted slightly near the doorway, his gaze flickering between us before settling somewhere on the floor. He had not said much since they returned, and his silence now felt less like distance and more like avoidance. I picked up the cup again, wrapping my hands around it as if to warm them, letting the moment stretch naturally. "It must be exhausting," I added softly, directing the comment toward Sophia. "Taking care of everything like this." She paused for half a second, just enough for me to notice, then continued without looking up. "You get used to it," she said. "Someone has to." The words hung in the air, simple, but layered in a way that felt intentional. I let them pass without reaction, lowering my gaze slightly, playing the role she expected. But inside I was listening more carefully than ever. Every word mattered now. Every pause. Every glance. After a moment, Sophia finished preparing the medication and stepped closer to the bed, her movements precise, controlled. I shifted my position slightly, not enough to interrupt, just enough to observe the process more clearly without making it obvious. The timing, the amount, the routine. I committed each detail to memory, not allowing myself to miss anything. When she finished, she stepped back, her attention briefly returning to me. "You handled things well," she said, her tone softer now, almost approving. "Not everyone is comfortable in situations like this." I met her gaze calmly, offering a small measured smile. "I have learned to be patient," I replied. That part at least was true. She held my gaze for a second longer, as if trying to read something beneath the surface, then looked away, satisfied with what she believed she saw. I stood up slowly, smoothing the front of my sweater, my posture relaxed. "I should head home soon," I added, letting the suggestion sound natural, unforced. "It is getting late." Daniel finally looked up, his expression shifting slightly, something uncertain passing through his eyes. "You do not have to rush," he said quietly, but there was no conviction in it. I shook my head gently. "I prefer to leave before it gets too dark," I replied. "Old habits." Sophia nodded once, already turning her attention back to her mother, her focus narrowing again. I stepped toward the door, pausing just long enough to take in the room one last time. The stillness, the control, the illusion they believed was intact. Then I walked out, my steps steady, my mind already moving ahead. Because now I was no longer trying to understand what was happening. I was preparing to make sure it could not stay hidden much longer. I did not drive home right away, even though I had said I would. Instead, I sat in my car at the end of their street, the engine off, my hands resting quietly on the steering wheel as the last light of the day faded into a dull gray. The house stood behind me, calm and ordinary from the outside, giving no indication of what was carefully maintained within its walls. I watched it for a moment longer, not out of hesitation but out of certainty. I had seen enough. Now it was about what I chose to do with it. I reached into my purse and finally took out my phone, holding it in my hand without unlocking it right away. Timing mattered. Not just what I knew, but when I revealed it. I thought about Eleanor's eyes, the way they had met mine with quiet understanding, the way she had endured something that had been hidden behind routine and careful language. Months, she had said. Months of being kept in a state that was not natural, not necessary, and certainly not honest. I inhaled slowly, then unlocked my phone and began with something simple. I searched for the medical offices listed on the envelopes I had seen earlier, noting each name, each number, each address. I did not call yet. I just gathered. Then I opened my messages and scrolled through my contacts until I found someone I had not spoken to in a long time. Someone who had once helped my late husband review documents when things needed to be precise. Someone who understood how to ask questions in the right way. I did not type a full explanation. Not yet. Just a short message. I need to verify medical and legal records. Quietly. Are you available? I stared at the screen for a moment, then pressed send. The response came faster than I expected. Call me. I did not. Not immediately. Instead, I set the phone down in my lap and looked back at the house one more time, letting the weight of everything settle into something steady and controlled. Inside that house, they believed nothing had changed. They believed I had seen exactly what they wanted me to see, nothing more, nothing less. And for now, that belief was my advantage. I started the car slowly, the engine humming back to life, and pulled away from the curb without looking back again. On the drive home, I kept everything simple. No sudden movements. No rushed decisions. Just a quiet sequence of steps forming in my mind, each one connected, each one deliberate. By the time I reached my driveway, I already knew what the next day would look like. I would return, not as someone who needed to understand, but as someone who already did. I turned off the engine and sat for a moment in the silence, my reflection faint in the windshield, calm, composed, unchanged on the surface. Then I reached for my phone again and pressed call. This time I did not wait, because whatever they had planned was built on the idea that no one would question it. And that was where they were wrong. I did not need to confront them. I did not need to argue. I only needed to bring the truth into the light they had been avoiding. And once that happened, everything they had carefully constructed would begin to fall apart on its own.